We'll start with your reaction to this ruling.
Well, it's a very significant ruling. Religious institutions under the First Amendment should be free to decide who it is that teaches their faith, the tenets of their faith. The Ninth Circuit had sort of cabined that rule to those who had a particular title or a credential, and it fails to recognize the religious diversity that we have in this nation. Many religious organizations, minority faiths in particular, don't use those terms, don't have those particular credentials for those who lead and teach their faith. And so it's important that the religious institutions themselves are free to make those determinations themselves without government interference, in this case, including a court of law.
You talk about government interference when it comes to religion. Quite frankly, we've seen that in action during these coronavirus shutdowns, with churches and places of worship being forced to shut down during this time. We've spoken to multiple pastors who've come on this program specifically talking about how they just wanted to meet with their congregants and they weren't able to do so. What do you think about all this happening during this time right now, during coronavirus response?
Well, it's, the religious community is a community that obviously cares very much about those around them. It's a balance. I mean, they obviously want to act in a way that's responsible and protective of the community itself with the coronavirus. There were early reports of churches, choir meetings where the virus was spread throughout those attending the meetings. Churches don't want to bring harm to anyone in their congregation or outside their congregation. But at the same time, there is the First Amendment protects the right of individuals to gather and to practice their faith. And so in Alaska, we balanced those. I think we did a good job of balancing those interests to allow churches and religious gatherings to meet, even during the sort of a hunker down time frame that we had, and just trusting the faith communities to do so responsibly and to act appropriately.
Yeah. I want to bring in our panel now of the day. We've got Jennifer Nassour, Republican strategist and former chairwoman of the Massachusetts Republican Party, and also Brandon Straka, founder of the Walkaway campaign. So we've got Kevin, Jennifer, and Brandon, and thank you all for being with us today. Brandon, we'll start with you here, because in California, we've seen Governor Gavin Newsom actually banning singing in churches, and yet people are free to protest on the streets however they like.
Right.
Yeah,
well,
Oh, go ahead, Brandon, and then Jennifer, we'll get to you.
Yes, it's an interesting long list of double standards that we're seeing right now, from what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. I think that I very famously was shown that recently on an American Airlines flight when I was removed from the flight for not wearing a mask. But meanwhile, the same people who are chastising me are praising and enabling and championing people who are going out and gathering by the thousands, not social distancing, not wearing masks, because according to the rules of the progressive left, if you are quote unquote fighting racism or any sort of social cause that they deem to be acceptable, then you really don't need to follow the rules. That supersedes anything that has to do with the crisis, with coronavirus, or any sort of danger that people might be in. However, if you would like to exercise your faith, if you would like to exercise your constitutional right to go out and gather and protest the shutdown, protest the economy being shut down, these are not causes that the political left has deemed acceptable reasons. And therefore, you're going to be demonized, you're going to be vilified, and in many cases, you might even get canceled.
Yeah, I guess that's always the fear, right? The fear of being canceled. Everyone has to wonder about that now, and the outcomes of that. I mean, people lose their job over things that have gone viral. Jennifer, you were going to say something, and I just am interested to hear your thoughts as well about this sort of double standard that we're really seeing play out when we're seeing these protests and gatherings, but that's only if it's outside of potentially a place of worship. That's okay.
Right, exactly. And what I find interesting is that I have a child who should have made her communion months ago and couldn't. And if the churches can control the population that comes in, they can properly space people out. people who are faithful and are going into their place of worship understand rules and regulations possibly better than anyone just walking around outside on the street. And so it's a who is able to go and protest and who can't worship. And all of a sudden, it's if the left says it's okay, it's okay. But if anyone wants to do anything outside of what they say is okay, you should be banned and stuck at home.
Kevin, have you heard any specific lawsuits in your state in regards to this encroachment of religious freedom?
No, in Alaska, we haven't had that experience, and that's primarily because Governor Dunleavy, with my advice, has done a very good job of accommodating our religious communities. We have a mayor in Anchorage who has been more restrictive, and there's been some tensions in that respect, but we haven't had any lawsuits that have been brought. But I think we've done a really good job of making sure that the government shouldn't be in the business of picking winners or losers or picking those who are favored or unfavored. Speech is speech. Religious gatherings are gatherings equal to any other gathering, and in some ways more protected because the First Amendment specifically protects religious freedom and religious liberty.
Yeah. Interesting to hear your perspective on it and to hear what's going on in Alaska as well. Kevin Clarkson, thank you for coming on the program today. Jen and Brandon, please stick around. We've got a lot more to talk about in today's show. Coming up, as